Germany is deploying troops to the Russian border for the first time since World War II. And now there are fears that we're going to be seeing a potential World War III. As the conflict is not abating, Donald Trump is threatening sanctions on people who work with China and Russia. And conscription is back on the table in Europe. EU Parliament published a document basically saying that opinions are favorable now. And more countries are starting to accept that they will need to conscript, largely because of the war with Russia. Now, Donald Trump has proposed a peace agreement with Ukraine and Russia. Ukraine is backing away from that deal. Vladimir Putin says the current deal doesn't work for Russia, and it looks like we're headed towards escalation. I certainly hope that's not the case, my friends, but we have fears of a World War III now, with Vladimir Putin reportedly plotting a large-scale war with NATO as World War III fears explode. And then I believe we have potentially this story. We have it from the India Times. The first signs of World War III. Iran says it is ready to strike the U.S. if Donald Trump decides to bomb Tehran and its military facilities. I don't know why they'd say that. I don't know what's in the news that would suggest Donald Trump wants to bomb Iran. But U.S. foreign policy has largely been in support of attacking Iran and invading for some time now. It's looking, my friends, like we are getting a very serious escalation in the war in the Middle East. That's why it's imperative that Donald Trump get this peace agreement done. But the problem we have, Democrats in this country, they want to fund the war. They want it to escalate. Me, I'd take any way to resolve this so it does not drag in NATO forces and force the United States to enter the fray, though we are. On top of all of this, in a quite wonderful story, The Telegraph basically breaks it down. How British commandos helped bring the CIA into the heart of the Ukraine war. That's funny. I was told over and over again that the U.S. was not involved in the war, but of course we are and have been, as has the U.K. This does not seem like it's going to end anytime soon. With the conflict between not just Russia and Ukraine, but also the political conflict between the EU and the U.S., some have predicted, though it may be a long shot, that the U.S. will break away from its alliances, its treaties with NATO, and enter into a trade agreement with Russia instead over the Northwest Passage. Now, I don't know for sure, but for the time being, it's looking pretty dire. Newsweek reports the Bundeswehr, or is it Bundeswehr, said German troops will be stationed along NATO's eastern flank in Lithuania, and the unit fully operational by 2027, marking the first time soldiers from the country will be on a permanent foreign deployment since World War II. We have a clear mission. We have to ensure the protection, freedom, and security of our Lithuanian allies here on NATO's eastern flank, said Brigadier General Christoph Huber, commander of the German brigade in the NATO ally. Germany had previously deployed troops to Afghanistan, though not on a permanent basis. The story is currently breaking right now. Shocking news update considering what's going on. Pissed off at Putin, Trump threatens tariffs on Russian oil if Moscow blocks Ukraine deal. Well, here we go, ladies and gentlemen. It looks like we're getting sanctions, escalation, troop deployments, potential conscription. Let's just hope that Donald Trump can actually enact some kind of peace agreement here. But here's the news from the Daily Mail. Putin slaps down Trump's Ukraine peace deal and issues a fresh set of demands. Russia says it's giving serious consideration to U.S. proposals on ending the war in Ukraine, but cannot accept President Donald Trump's current peace deal and has issued a fresh set of demands. Moscow wants the U.S. to take into account what it regards as the root causes of the conflict, a Russian diplomat was quoted by the state media as saying on Tuesday. We take the models and solutions proposed by the Americans very seriously, but we can't accept it at all in its current form. Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov was quoted as saying, as far as we can see, there is no place in them today for our main demand, namely to solve the problems related to the root causes of this conflict. He was cited as telling the magazine International Affairs in an interview. It is completely absent, and that must be overcome. Trump scolded Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Sunday, expressing frustration at the continued fighting in a war that he had pledged to swiftly stop. Trump insisted progress was being made in the negotiations, but said that he would consider imposing further sanctions to put pressure on Moscow. He also accused Zelensky of trying to back out of a deal with the U.S. on access to Ukraine's mineral resources. Ukraine has conducted a first round of consultations with the U.S. on what he said was the latest version of the mineral deal. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha said Tuesday. Putin has effectively refused a U.S. proposal for an immediate and full 30-day halt in the fighting, despite Trump's prodding. Also, a partial ceasefire in the Black Sea that could allow safer shipments has fallen foul of conditions imposed by Kremlin negotiators. Russia is holding back on a Black Sea deal in order to stall efforts towards a general ceasefire and extract additional concessions from the West, according to an assessment late Monday by the Institute for the Study of War, a Washington-based think tank. Zelensky was blunt in his analysis of developments in an address late Sunday. Moscow blatantly makes a mockery of our partners' efforts to advance a peace agenda. Putin previously has ruled out a temporary break in hostilities, saying that it would only benefit Ukraine and its Western allies by letting them replenish their arsenals. He has insisted that Moscow wants a comprehensive agreement that would ensure a lasting settlement. Now, this certainly has gone way further than Trump expected it. And that's pretty worrying. It looks like to me, I would assume, with Ukraine pulling back from this deal, having recently said that they would engage with it, now pulling back, it looks like they believe that Donald Trump will not be able to enforce any of these deals, and that they're placing their bet on NATO, the military-industrial complex, and the administrative state over Donald Trump. Interesting. They say that Trump has signaled that he could consider new oil sanctions on Russia, but Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov indicated Tuesday that a breakthrough negotiations is not imminent. The issues that we are discussing in connection with Ukrainian settlement are quite complex, and they require a lot of additional efforts. Meanwhile, deadly attacks by both Russia and Ukraine have continued, and they are gearing up for spring campaigns in their war of attrition along the roughly 1,000-kilometer front line. Overnight, Russia fired no Shahed drones at Ukraine for the first time in more than 5 months. But Andriy Kovalenko, the head of the counter-disinformation branch of Ukraine's Security Council, detected no change in Russian strategy. He says, for now, this means nothing, he said on Telegram. Now, of course, in the UK, we have this from express.co.uk, the media is going to try and fan the flames as much as possible. Stories like this: Putin is plotting a large-scale war, an argument they have made over and over again. Listen, Vladimir Putin wants to secure this territory. There is no reason to believe we are going to actually see Russia instigate a third world war or make advances on Lithuania and Poland. And did they really say onto Russia's doorstep? Oh, okay. So it's not the border. They're being no. Okay, that is true. Okay, it is. My bad. How stupid do I feel? Kaliningrad, of course, to bring up all the time, borders Lithuania directly. And with German troops now being deployed to Lithuania, that puts them directly on the border with Russia's Kaliningrad, an isolated oblast on the Baltic separated by Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, etc. You can see here on the battle map, for those that are watching, you've got all of Russia, a very large country. But most people are unaware. Most people don't even know where Ukraine is, to be honest. But they're unaware of Kaliningrad. It's effectively a state of Russia that is north of Poland and southwest of Lithuania on the Baltic, and it is isolated from the Russian mainland. That is a heavily militarized zone. Now, of course, the point I'm bringing up, actually, this is really interesting. There we go. Take a look at this key. So in the battle in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, you can see what Russia has seized. This territory is the Russian advances. And they point out that the assessed Russian advance and I believe the Russian control is a heavy red line. Take a look at the entire eastern and southern region of Ukraine stretching down to Crimea. Russia has secured what is referred to as the land bridge, extending from Russia through Ukraine into Crimea. Why? For those that aren't familiar, in Sevastopol, that is where Russia's Black Sea fleet is housed. It's a major port for them. Now, some have suggested Russia controlling these areas here could simply build a new port I don't think Russia is intent on giving up one of its most strategic locations, a multi-billion-dollar naval port and all of its military assets and information, to Ukraine or the West, should it fall, which is likely why they invaded. Now, in this argument they keep making that Putin wants to invade Poland and Belarus. Maybe. But interestingly, you can see there's fighting in the Kursk region and north of Kharkiv. This is where Ukrainian counteroffensives are occurring in Ukraine. But on the eastern side, Russia has secured full control of all of the oblasts of Ukraine, which is Donetsk, Luhansk, Mariupol. I believe they don't have Zaporizhia, which is just north of. Oh, actually, no, it looks like they do. They have a portion of Zaporizhia, the oblast, and then, of course, Kherson into Crimea. It looks like Putin has won exactly what he wanted to win in this regard, and he likely will not end this war unless he is guaranteed control of this region. It makes no sense why. Let me just put it this way. As the Democrats and the pro-Ukraine war individuals keep saying, Putin is getting flattened. It was supposed to be over in 3 days, and now it's been 3 years. You think he's going to want to try to extend that into a war in Poland with the rest of NATO? I doubt it. But don't believe the lies, my friends. How British commandos helped bring the CIA into the heart of the Ukraine war. Really? So the CIA, U.S. Special Forces, and veteran private volunteers are fighting in Ukraine, but the U.S. is not at war with Russia? Spare me. This is the Telegraph going to let us read it? Oh, okay. They're not gonna let us read it, but whenever I get it pulled up, they always close it after the fact. But it's okay, because we will get it for you guys. Let's there we go. Let's see if we can get the article up. And this one's particularly important. Okay, the article does work. So we have this from the Telegraph. A team of British commandos escorted Ukrainian generals out of Kiev to join an emergency war room where Western military chiefs plotted the defeat of Russia. 2 generals were taken by armed guard on diplomatic passports into Poland, then Germany shortly after the war broke out to join an operation involving the CIA that would help turn the tide in the conflict and embarrass Vladimir Putin's armed forces. I mean, do I need to read more? They say the operations room was set up 2 months into the war in Clay Kaserne, the headquarters of U.S. Army Europe and Africa, a component of the U.S. Armed Forces in Wiesbaden, Germany. Let me just stress that again for you. The operation was set up by the U.S. in Germany. German troops have now deployed. Indeed. Here's where it gets particularly interesting. The EU has published this on the 19th of March. So this is only 2 weeks ago. Conscription as an element in European Union preparedness. Once considered an issue of the past, conscription has increasingly made its way back onto European, EU, and global policy agendas in recent years, mainly since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. As EU defense policy has steadily progressed, with new procurement initiatives and defense industry reinforcement, a parallel discussion on the EU's armed forces is evolving in the context of EU's common security and defense policy. Europe's civilian and military preparedness and readiness has also come under the spotlight recently. As highlighted by the report presented in October of 24 by former Finnish President Sauli Niinistö, probably pronouncing it wrong, opinion polls in some member states also show growing support for the reintroduction of national service or conscription, mounting threats to European security, fears of transatlantic disengagement, as well as the position of the new United States administration and potential peace plans for Ukraine involving the presence of European troops, has raised awareness of the need to ready member states' armed forces for the most extreme military contingencies. The conscription landscape across the EU is diverse. National defense is primarily carried out by professional armed forces, but conscription is becoming increasingly relevant. Some EU countries retained conscription practices beyond the end of the Cold War, while others reintroduced conscription modalities following Russia's 2022 invasion. Peacetime conscription policies differ among member states in, among other things, the number of conscripts, the length of service, the level of compensation provided, and the size of the reserve forces. Niinistö reports, the Niinistö, I'm pronouncing that wrong, report underscored the potential importance of conscription in developing a holistic total defense concept that connects military and civil service, while promoting a whole-of-society approach to crisis response and preparedness. It also proposes increasing structured exchanges between member states to identify national service and conscription model best practices, potentially facilitated by the EU. Some experts have highlighted the benefit of implementing conscription, while others are skeptical of poorly trained and ill-equipped conscript armies. The European Parliament has repeatedly underlined the limited number of personnel devoted to CSDP missions and operations, highlighting issues related to force generation. In other words, they are entertaining the reality that there will be conscription in Europe, as Vladimir Putin is already doing it, with the latest news being Vladimir Putin signs decree calling up 160,000 Russians for military service. Indeed. Another 160,000 conscripts will be brought in. They say the decree, which was reported by news agency Interfax and also published on the government website for legal announcements, says conscription applies to all citizens aged between 18 and 30 and covers the period from April to July. The official statement also said that soldiers, sailors, sergeants, and non-commissioned officers whose conscripted military service has expired will be discharged from military service. The Russian military traditionally holds conscription twice a year, once in spring and again in autumn. My friends, I don't much believe that we're at threat of World War III because Trump might strike Iran. I think that is unlikely and unnecessary. But all of this is bubbling up right now. Trump threatening tariffs on Russia. Anybody who does business with them is going to pay a tariff on oil. Germany is deploying troops, and we know that this is the hand of the United States. The U.S. is sending these, is triggering these operations, is organizing these operations, and it is patently obvious, and it has been the whole time. So therein lies the challenge for Donald Trump right now. Vladimir Putin, in my opinion, likely would have never started the war and likely would have agreed to terms well before the war started had Donald Trump stayed in office in 2020. But the war began, and I'll give you the simple version. Under Barack Obama, the U.S. was involved to a certain degree with support for groups in Ukraine that opposed the current government of Yanukovych. He fled the country to Russia after being ousted and chased from his mansion. Elections were held, and you ended up with, I believe it was Poroshenko. I could be wrong at the time. But to put it simply, Ukraine split. If this was 2013 and 2014, there was a separatist movement and what people were referring to as the rising civil war in Ukraine. However, Donald Trump got elected. Now, I went to Ukraine in 2013 and 2014. Crazy. And what was truly just crazy about it was that it was a protest movement at first. Shortly after this, it became a separatist movement and civil war. That was 2014. Firebombs, snipers, killings. It was getting crazy. They called it a civil war because the eastern region was in conflict. However, after Donald Trump got elected, I returned to the country in, I believe it was 2017. And I visited old sources and asked them about the ongoing civil war. And they said, no, there's no civil war. We don't call it that. It's just skirmishes and separatists. It was amazing to me. I said, wow, okay, I guess that was abated, right? That averted. But then Donald Trump lost his election. Almost immediately, Russia begins amassing troops on their western front with Ukraine. Then in 2022, in spring, Russia launched its offensive into Ukraine, invading. I don't think they would have invaded had Donald Trump been president because it looked like things were simmering down. When Joe Biden got back in, Putin knew that the Democrat establishment was hell-bent on cutting them off from Crimea. With Donald Trump in office, he's less concerned about it. Trump's priorities were not Eastern Europe and whatever this conflict was. And he was upset with Joe Biden over the Burisma scandal. But when Trump lost, Putin changed the game. And now that Trump got in, I believe the attitude of Vladimir Putin is, we don't know what's going to happen after 2028. Putin doesn't want to re-enter another phase where if the Democrat establishment regains control of the United States, he is once again at war and at risk of losing his Black Sea Fleet. Now, I'm no fan of Putin. I think he's a scummy guy. Anybody who needs to hold on to power that long has a broken culture as it is. Trump talking about a third term, we don't need it, we don't want it. A lot of people do. I'm not playing those games. Granted, it is only a recent amendment that set the 2-term limit, and amendments can be changed to the Constitution. Fine. We don't want to live in that kind of society. There's a reason why we have a 2-term limit. Vladimir Putin, I do not believe is a good guy, but it would be absurd not to understand why he's not going to let the Western forces, NATO or the EU, cut him off from the Black Sea Fleet. One could argue they could start building in Russian territory on the Black Sea, perhaps, but they've been in Crimea for over 100 years or longer as they control the territory of Ukraine. This has been a Russian base forever. And Ukraine now moving to join NATO or the EU would cut Russia off. They're not going to let that happen. I don't want to see World War III. But it is shocking that the media is pushing the narrative, they're deploying troops in Europe. I believe the intent is clear. They will not give Donald Trump the opportunity to negotiate peace. I believe that the goal here is to make sure that there will be war. Trump can't stop it. And there's nothing that can avert it. NATO is going to do what they want in escalating and exacerbating the problems. Putin's going to tell Donald Trump, you've got no control over what they're doing. Trump might say, then we're breaking away from NATO, perhaps. That's why they mentioned conscription. What do they call it? Transatlantic disentanglement, they called it. The U.S. does not want to be dragged into this war. The previous administration did, the Democrats do, but the rest of us don't. I'll leave it there. Stay tuned. We got more segments coming up in just a bit. And you can follow me on X and Instagram at Timcast. Thanks for hanging out. We'll see you all in the next segment.